Welcome to Code Savvy Presents, a podcast about computer science, technology, accessibility, and inclusion. So I am going to have you both introduce yourselves and just tell us a little bit about who you are and kind of what you do for work and how you got into working with open source, or what your relationship to open source is.
Sure. Hey, I am Casie Siekman. Yep. I am a senior software engineer and team lead over at Suna in Minneapolis, and they have locations in Denver and Austin as well. And I have been working with open source, I guess, for almost 7 years. I can't even remember how I first got into it. I feel like open source is so ubiquitous now, especially in the front end world, which is where I like to live. I don't even know the things that are not open source. But I started with Node on the back end and Angular on the front end. So that was kind of my introduction to just coding in general. And that was about, 6.5, 7 years ago.
Awesome. How about you, Jen?
I am Jenn Bonine. So I was in big tech with Oracle. So a lot of people, when I was at Oracle, we were purchasing a company that owned Java, and everyone was worried we were going to take it from open source to a different technology. So that was interesting to watch the dynamic on that. But post that, I built an AI company based off of some open source AI technologies that we used in the gaming space that we eventually exited to a company held by one of the Gradient Google funds. And now I'm building some more technology in the space around AI and the intersection of the metaverse, which has the base components of open source.
Awesome. I would love to hear more about that in a little bit.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that.
Right? Let's start maybe by talking about a little bit of your favorites. So what are some of the favorite open source projects, either things that you've created or other people's projects that you just really enjoy using or find a lot of good benefit from in the open source space?
Open source. I love Vue.js. It feels so big right now. It's like, I always forget, like, huge, big front end frameworks, like big in popularity. It's like open source. It's so crazy. I love it working with it as a framework. I feel like it really lowers the barrier to entry for new coders, and even for new people on our team when they jump in to start coding on our project. I feel like Vue makes it so easy to just start coding right away. And the single file component structure that they have just makes so much sense. We have Evan Yu that created it, and he worked on Angular while he was at Google, which was kind of like a big, heavy front end hammer of a framework. And Vue was something where it's like, if you just didn't need to throw the whole book at something, you can have something a little bit lighter. And Vue is probably like my favorite one to work with. I have tried to contribute to the Node project at a Node.js conference, and I got my pull request open and reviewed, but then I forgot to follow up on it.
Oh no.
So I've actually never contributed to an open source project, but I have used plenty of them.
How about you, Jen? Do you have favorites?
Well, here's what I would say. Like, as I mentioned, working with Oracle, I mean, if we look at Linux, right? So Linux, to be honest, in my mind, is the kernel that makes everything else possible. So it's kind of the OG in the open source space for me. But obviously from projects I've worked on, we did lots of next gen tech. And so I love the fact that it's a collaboration space where all people can contribute and bring in their ideas and suggestions and one thing we were working on, there's, everyone's familiar with Dish Network, and they have these things called Joey and Hoppers, which they transmit data between. And when Roku first came out, we were trying to figure out how to automate some testing on those Rokus, but they were unbreakable, so to speak. So we actually used Python and Ruby to jailbreak a Roku in a legal way. So it was very legal, but we were able to get into a Roku when they first were out, and you weren't able to get in using open source frameworks with Python and Ruby. And we wrote a gem that's still used today to test on Roku, to automate some of the testing on a Roku device, to be able to say what would happen if we did this, this, or this. And that's what I love about open source, is it just allows you so much freedom that you normally don't get, because once we published that gem, we were able to have other people contribute and enhance what we already built.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is awesome. You touched a little bit on this, Jenn, and I want to get more into this, but open source kind of being a platform for everyone to contribute, right? So I'm wondering, there's been some press in the last few years about how the open source community can be hostile towards women and people of color, and how it's not super accepting. And I'm wondering if either of you have ever experienced, hostility or a feeling that you maybe didn't belong in the open source community.
I can maybe start out with this. So from my perspective, I mentioned I came from Oracle, and, tech in general, when you sit in a room, we all know the stats prove that there aren't as much diversity. There still aren't diverse people going into tech the way we would like to see. There is a lot of misses in technology because we're coming at it from a very homogeneous perspective and not a diverse perspective. And what I would say, it's not just diversity in terms of, ethnicity and background, but it's diversity of thought. Mm-hmm. And what I love and what we need to embrace in any community is diversity of thought, would be my leading point. Is, the more people who look at a problem and try and solve it from different perspectives, the greater value we see in what's produced. And when you limit the perspective to just a few individuals or people, you're limiting the value of the solution. So what I would say is we have to broaden our perspective and allow all people in. And what I've found just in, I hate to say it, but the pandemic has brought us some good things along with some challenging things. But I think one of the good things is, with us being more digital and working online, you don't really know, is this male or female? What ethnicity is this person? And we maybe are more open, as we all should be, to diversity of thought and challenging our ideas to make them better, not challenge, in the sense of we all want to think the same thing, but why not bring in all these perspectives of how to view a problem?
I love that. It's a super good point. How about you, Casie? Have you had any experience with kind of not feeling like you belong, and how has the open source community, how has that experience been for you?
So the most recent experience that I've really had, again, is with Vue.js, and they have such an amazing community, actually. And I have gotten into the habit of asking a few people questions on Twitter very frequently. Maybe not recently. I haven't been working too much on the front end in the past couple of months, but the responses I would receive were so quick and helpful. I wasn't, contributing anything, but it was so helpful. I felt like that community just really embraces and reaches out and wants everybody to enjoy Vue as much as they do. So I haven't felt the hostility there. When I was and honestly, overall, I've not felt hostility. And so what I'm about to get into is not hostile either. It sounded like I was changing vibes, but I attended a Node.js conference really early on in my tech career, and they had a really cool opportunity where they had like a workshop to learn how to make your first contribution to the Node.js project. And I thought that was a great way to encourage people to just start, because it was kind of like a led workshop. There was a bunch of us, there was a bunch of tables throughout the whole room, 4 or 6 of us at each table on our computers, and basically a PowerPoint presentation, a presenter talking to us, walking us through how to get set up to contribute to the project. And then once we were all set up, you raised your hand and somebody came around to you and basically gave you a slip of paper with your first issue. And you could go through and submit your first solution to an issue that was on the project. I got feedback on mine, but I was so new that I just did not have the confidence or just the understanding to really comprehend what needed to be done of me, now that I was like back in Minnesota on my own, trying to like decipher what this PR review was saying. And so I just didn't follow up on it. But actually the Node community, like whoever was in charge of reviewing my PR, they like followed up with me a couple of times. They emailed me and they were like, let me know if there's anything I can do to help you get this across the finish line. But I think I got busy, but I was also new at the same time, where I just was like, no, I think I'm going to stay away now.
Yeah.
So I feel like I haven't gotten really deep into the open source community, but the interactions I have had seem to have been pretty positive, and supportive.
On that note, do either of you have kind of ideas of what would help boost that that confidence or that engagement? Wondering, if there's maybe some takeaways that maybe the open source organizers can think about as they engage with newbies and making it more comfortable for people who don't have that experience.
Yeah, for me, it was just like the language. I come from a boot camp background, which I'm very proud of, but I don't have that 4-year CS degree foundation. So there are terms, there are expectations that just fly over my head, especially when I was starting out. And looking at these open source projects, trying to get started with things, they sometimes talked in a way that assumed you already knew how to get to a certain point. And some of the feedback I would see on there, because I would still try to look for some issues to pick up. And I was like, maybe I'll get back into this. But it was kind of phrased it wasn't the most supportive, helpful ways of phrasing things. It wasn't super inclusive language. It just wasn't something that felt like I was allowed to jump in, not knowing what I was doing, and ask questions. You kind of hear like the horror stories of Stack Overflow.
Yes. Yeah.
It gave me those kind of vibes, like just when I went back to try to get back into it. So it was paying more attention to how we communicate things. I think communication, it can be done so easily because we can kind of shut our brain off and still communicate, but we're not communicating well, right? And so I think bringing focus back to how we're communicating with people, especially when it's done in written text, and thinking about how is another person going to receive this information, is just a good place to start. I'm kind of talking a lot, but I have a lot of thoughts of how to open things up.
Yeah, I think, that speaks to why it's so important that we have, other people at the table, and that thought diversity, like Jenn was talking about, because then, the more people that are contributing, the more diversity in our communications will happen too. And I think that's important.
Yep.
Do either of you have or any suggestions of where people might start? Like, have you come across any good resources or good spaces for people who don't know how to get started in open source, but maybe want to? Like, are there any groups that you would plug or projects that you are aware of?
I would say, just from my perspective, try it out. So go to GitHub, look at projects that interest you. Everyone has different things that you're interested in. Like I mentioned the Roku stuff we did, and there's other things out there, but find something that interests you, follow that wiki. So go to GitHub, find a project you like, follow the wiki. They may have a Discord. If they don't as we are just talking about, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions and learn. Like, I've found a lot of the people that actually contribute to open source are willing to take suggestions and feedback. If you find one that isn't, don't be discouraged, move on to another person who's more open-minded, but ask questions, because if they're really good open source people, they're into collaboration and they want to learn. So they want to hear your thoughts, because your perspective, as we mentioned, diversity of thought, your perspective is different than theirs. And if they're a really good developer, they're going to want to hear why you look at it differently, and then pull down the repo and start tinkering. Like, don't be afraid, like just grab that repo, start playing with it and adding and making comments. And then what you're able to do is provide value back to the community. And that's the whole concept to me is, the more people involved, that diversity of thought, and you have your own version of it that you're looking at and you see the world differently, you're going to add things they didn't think about. And so I think that's, the crux of our open source community is exactly that. Just grab it, play with it, start tinkering, use your perspective. Don't be afraid. You don't think like someone else. Know that your perspective comes from a different view or angle on a problem. And the more people looking at a problem, the more outcomes to solve that problem, and the better, in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you would add to that, Casie? Any other projects or things that you might direct somebody to go if they're just getting started?
Yeah. If going to GitHub and just like looking just seems like too big of a kind of empty space, I can say like the Node.js, if you just go to nodejs.org, they should have like a get involved tab, and then it gives you a contribute, or you can just Google how to contribute to the Node.js project and it'll bring you there. Because even though I didn't finish my contribution to the project, they do have good documentation as to how to ask for general help, reporting an issue, and then like contributing to. And the nice thing is like they have steps on how to clone down the repo, and basically the steps that they want you to run tests, and how they want you to format your pull request. And so they really do kind of hold your hand through the process. And again, even when somebody reviewed my PR, they followed up with me a couple times to make sure that I had like seen that there was a review on there, and that, all I had to do was update it and resubmit it. So I feel like the Node.js community was really great. Also, just like Twitter, LinkedIn, your network, anybody, if you put something out there that is just like, hey, anybody want to help me figure out how to contribute to an open source project? Just like what Jenn was saying before, is like, if they are good open source developers, they're going to want to help you, and they're going to want to help you learn and become part of the community.
I love that. One question I just thought of, is there, for people that are starting out and looking at, open source development as maybe a career path, are there any, from your experience, what employers are looking for, or kind of, are there any tips that you would give for areas of study that might be important if someone's looking to get a job in the open source space?
Are we talking like getting a job as a developer using open source languages, or
Yes,
working on an open source project?
I would say getting a job as an open source developer. Like if there are any good, languages to focus on, or, skills that they might want to build up to become a good developer in that arena.
Yeah, that's a great question. Jenn, do you want to go first? I've gone first the last couple. I don't want to take up too much space.
No. What I would say is, again, find your passion. So what I always tell people is find, if you want to do open source, do it in an area that interests you. So for example, one of the things that I was looking at was around Scrum VM, and it's open source software for replacing interpreters for classic adventure games that don't run well on current modern hardware. So you can get involved in tons of ways in these spaces, but don't just pick something because someone else is in it. Pick something you really care about that's kind of interesting to you as a human being, because all the research shows if we focus on things that are passion areas or that excite us. So if you love like sports, work on open source around sports. If you love AI, work on that. But what I would always say is if you align to your passion and areas of interest, you're going to be more dedicated to developing, contributing, and being a part of that community. And if that's who you are and it's part of your, natural innate abilities, you're probably going to add a lot more value because you love that space, that space, you're interested in it, and you're going to be able to contribute. So I would say, align to things you are truly passionate about is my learning over my career, is find those things that really interest you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great, I like that. Finding those things that interest you, because when it gets hard, those are the things that are going to help keep you interested, right? Is like when the code gets hard, it's like, it's still in an area that is intriguing to me. Yeah, I think the thing that's helped me in my career working with open source is like adaptability, because these things are constantly changing, and being okay with that and saying like, well, it's changed. I'm just going to learn how to work with it in this new way. And looking at that as an opportunity to learn, instead of just being like, what, they tore the rug out from underneath me and now I have to learn all these new things. This sucks. And then the other thing that's really helped me in my career is just like learning how to ask really good questions. Because if you're asking somebody a question on Twitter, because I actually use that to get in touch with people that have written the code. I'll ask them directly, or asking a question on Stack Overflow, or asking a question on like a GitHub issue, or just like learning how to Google the question or ask it of other developers. The more concise and researched and pointed your question can be, the better the answer you're going to get will be, and the more helpful that answer will be. That'll just really help push you as far, like, as I think far into the future. Like I remember working on like a Microsoft project once and Googling for things and not getting anything, because you had to be like a part of a member on a forum to see all of the answers. And I was so not used to that. I was so used to developing in open source and having all of these answers at my fingertips if I knew how to ask the right questions.
It's such a good skill to have in any arena.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So lastly, I want to give each of you an opportunity to talk about projects you're working on now, or maybe projects that you have coming up in the future that you're excited about and want to share a little bit about, just the things that you're doing day to day.
Yeah, I can talk about, just like, would it be okay if I just talk about the work we're doing at SUNA? That's pretty much
love,
like
yeah.
Whole,
yeah, no, that's awesome.
Awesome. So real quick about SUNA, we're a fast casual content startup. So our focus is making the internet more beautiful by just creating some really fantastic photos, videos, stop motion GIFs for small businesses, entrepreneurs, basically, or medium businesses, anybody who needs photos. That is what we focus on. And so me and my team, we are building the web app that allows customers to interact with us, and also allows our staff to interact with SUNA and interact with the customers. And it's built using Ruby on Rails in the back end, Postico, and then Vue.js on the front end. And we have had our summit recently and talked about plans through 2025. And we just have so many exciting features coming up right now. And I am just super excited I'm learning more about Ruby on Rails and all the magical things it does. And so I'm super excited to continue working on that. But Vue.js is my favorite. We're on Vue 2 right now. I'm hoping someday we can bump up to Vue 3. But that is where our work is falling, and just super exciting. Also, we're hiring. If anybody wants to join a team, yeah, I am really excited to see all the cool things we're going to do, especially with Vue.js on the front end.
Very cool. How about you, Jen? What is going on in your world these days?
Oh, it's so crazy. I'm actually in Dubai right now. So we're working on Expo 2020 is happening in Dubai in 2022 because of the pandemic. So they were supposed to host 2 years ago, but obviously because of what happened across the globe, it's happening now 2 years later. And we're focused on bringing the bid for a specialized World Expo. So think the Seattle Needle, like the Eiffel Tower, all these came out of World's Fairs. The US hasn't hosted one in the last 45 years. So what we're focused on is tech that bridges the gap from humans that have all these unique things going on in their countries to bringing a framework of how to display what, say, Nicaragua or, Ecuador or Canada is working on, so the world can see all these advancements they're making. So we're here for the next couple of weeks and then bidding for the US to host in 2027, 5 years from now, a specialized expo around health and wellness. So all of the open source we're looking at right now in the tech is around how do we display and showcase what all these amazing countries that participate in World Expos. There's 192 countries involved. How do we build that in a metaverse with open source technology on blockchain with the NFTs inside of that? So it's a lot of moving pieces with developers from all over the world, which I think is the perfect way to engage open source because it's open, collaborative. And I actually believe that the way the world actually comes together and collaborates may not be on a political scale, but it's going to be on the tech. And we saw that kind of in the pandemic with the research and vaccines. So that MedTech Convergence, I believe that where we'll see true world, collaboration will be in the open source space and tech.
That is so exciting. And I would love if you would send us, links to something we can follow, and just keep tabs on how that's going and what your proposal and everything, how that turns out. It's super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll give you all the things. And, that's where I really think this open source community has the capability as tech, leaders and people with expertise to bridge the gap of where the world has created borders where there don't need to be. I think the tech community could break down those borders and those walls and really truly collaborate together, which we've always seen to build a better future for all of us.
It's amazing. Is there any kind of last things that you'd like people to know about, or tips or any takeaways that you would share with our audience on open source?
I think just like the community in general, like I just want people to know that we want you in our community. Like I just want everybody to have the opportunity to try coding as a career. I think it's such a fantastic career. So if anybody out there is ever thinking about it or wondering if it's somewhere that you could thrive, I would just so much encourage you just to give it a try and reach out, ask for help, ask to connect with somebody. A lot of the people I've met in this industry everybody I've met did not get to be where they are by themselves. And a lot of those same people want to help get more people into this industry, and they want to help others like others have helped them get to be where they are. And so if it's something that you're thinking about getting into, or if you're in it and you're unsure if you belong, like, please just reach out and ask for help, talk to people. I'm just so excited to see new people in the community and hear those new voices, that I hope it just keeps going and going. Yeah.
100%. I agree. Jenn,
And I
any
would-
last ideas? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would echo that. Like, I'm a firm believer in that, of the more voices in the community, the better, which is why I love open source, because it's, to me, all about diverse voices and more voices and more people contributing. And I give you it's almost like, if you think of that, to me, it's like Legos and building blocks, right? Like, I may arrange them in a certain way because that's my viewpoint of the world, but then I add 2 more people to my team and they see the world differently, and they're going to re-architect my building blocks slightly differently, maybe more efficiently, maybe better. And the community is only better with more voices. And I think right now that what we can do as a community is not distinguish between who it is that's contributing, but that there's diversity of thought in who's contributing, and giving different perspectives to make us stronger, better, and brighter in the future. And that's why, to me, I always see tech as leading the way, and there may be political things or other things that get in the way of the world advancing, but I see tech as being the place where we're able to bridge political gaps, other things that exist in the ecosystem, by leveraging diversity of thought. So I think my key takeaway for everyone is diversity of thought. If someone doesn't agree with you, that's not bad. That's actually good, because they're going to challenge you to be better and think differently. And we should encourage that diversity of thought more than ever in the tech space.
Amen. Thank you both so much for having this conversation today. And I can't wait to see the things that you do in your careers and with the projects that you're working on. They sound amazing. So thank you again for being here and having this discussion.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a joy.
An absolute pleasure. You guys are amazing, and I'm proud to be a part of this community with both of you.
Oh, me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Code Savvy Presents is produced by Code Savvy, a 501c3 nonprofit organization committed to making computer science accessible. Visit us at www.codesavvy.org.